Today we are doing the gunpowder revolution. Specifically, we are going to ask the question, how did Europe, starting about the year 1700, conquer the world? So after the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe became divided, very poor, and very weak compared with the rest of the world. But then starting in the year 1700, Europe very quickly, in only about 200 years' time, will go on to conquer the entire world. So today we are going to examine how this happened. Okay. So before we begin, I want you guys to remember a very important concept that we have been developing throughout this course. And the concept is this: the nature of the military determines the nature of the political system in societies, in nations. Okay? So the four specific examples we've looked at are Sparta, Athens, Macedonia, and Rome. Because Sparta had a hoplite army, it became an oligarchy. Okay? Oligarchy means rule by the few, the rule by the elite. And hoplites were farmers who could afford their own armor and weaponry. Okay? Athens had a navy, and so it was a democracy. And the idea here is that anyone and everyone can row a boat. And if you can row a boat, you can fight a war, you can help Athens win, and therefore you can participate in the political process. So Athens was a democracy. Macedonia, where Alexander the Great is from, it was a cavalry-based army. And because only the nobility could afford horses, it was a monarchy. And the last example is Rome. Now, the thing about Rome that made it distinct from these societies is that it was willing to make tremendous sacrifices on the battlefield because it could replenish its soldiers with allies from neighboring nations in the Italian peninsula. And as such, it was a republic. Now, the difference between a republic and democracy is that in democracy, everyone has the right to vote. So the decisions are based on majority rule, okay? But in a republic, it is ruled by law and tradition and history. So people will do what has been traditionally accepted as a norm. And as such, you can bring in immigrants into your society very quickly. This is important for us because Rome will become the model for America. Okay? America is not democracy, it is republic. A very important difference. So I want you guys to remember this idea. The military, the nature of the military will determine the nature of your political system in your society. Okay? All right. So let's go over some basic military history. In Greece, when the polises were fighting each other, in very much the same way that the warring states were fighting each other in China, the main soldier is called a hoplite. The hoplite means shield in Greek. And the thing about the hoplite that's very important is that he was a self-sufficient soldier, meaning that most of the time he was a farmer, but when there was a war, he would grab his armor and his shield and his spear and he would go to war. You didn't need economy to allow the hoplite to exist. Okay? This was a self-sufficient system. Over time, the Macedonians will take the hoplite formation and turn it into the Macedonian phalanx. And the Romans will have their legion. Okay? Now, the difference between the Macedonians and the Romans, the difference between this system and the traditional Greek system is now you have a standing army. These are professional soldiers that must be supported by the economy. This is cavalry, the Roman cavalry, and obviously these are nobility because only they can afford to have horses. These are the Vikings that we've studied before. Again, this is pretty self-sufficient. The Vikings are able to build their own ships very quickly and repair them. And they are able to go off in small bands. Okay? The steppes people became archers, right? So the Mongolians are the classic example. And again, the thing here is that these people, ever since they were born, could ride horses and shoot arrows. And that's why they were so effective soldiers. And that's why, for the longest time, the steppes people were the dominant military force in the world. Okay? They could come in and conquer all the agricultural empires. This will include the Yamnaya, which we talked about. It will also include the Turks and the Mongolians. Okay? In medieval Europe, they developed a new system where the knight becomes the main military force in the army. Now, the knight, as you can see, it requires armored horses and armored and weapons. And this is very expensive. And you have to train from an early age to become a knight. And that's why you now have a system called feudalism, where the entire economy revolves around maintaining knights for war purposes. Okay? This is where feudalism comes from. What makes feudalism stick is the idea of castles. So feudalism is about decentralization, where the knights and the lord have control over the local territory, and there's nothing the king can do about it. Why? Because maybe if there's a fight between the lords and the king, and the king comes with his army, the lords can just hide in their castle. And as you can see, it's very hard to besiege and destroy a castle. First of all, there's a defensive perimeter, the moat, and then the high walls. Okay? And eventually, the king will have to give up. So, in the feudal system, the king is more like a figurehead who is appointed as maybe the chairman or the elected leader. Okay? But the king does not have that much power over the local areas. This changes in 1453, okay, in the city of Constantinople. So for about close to 1,000 years, Constantinople was the wealthiest, most powerful city in Europe. They are the heirs to the Roman Empire. They consider themselves the Eastern Roman Empire. And they are invincible because of their high walls. Remember, we talked about the Byzantine Empire before. And for about 1,000 years, Constantinople was powerful because they were invincible. You cannot besiege the city. Okay? But in 1453, this changes because the Ottoman Turks come in with cannons. And they laid siege to Constantinople and they destroy the walls. And this was unimaginable before. And so it's gunpowder that allows the Ottomans to destroy the once impenetrable Constantinople. And this marks a revolution now in Europe. Now, people understand that you need gunpowder if you are to win wars in the future. Okay? This is a revolution now in Europe. So, over the centuries, what will happen is this. Gunpowder will radically remake the world in three fundamental ways. The first way that's important is the steppe people cease to be a threat. Okay? So, for thousands of years, the steppes, right, the Mongolians, the Turks, the Yamnaya, they drove history because they could come in and conquer empires and establish new societies. Now, with gunpowder, the cities can defend themselves against the steppe people, and eventually, over time, the Russians will colonize the steppes. And they will cease to be a factor in development of global history. Okay? So this is the end of the steppes. That's the first fundamental change. Second is, this will mark the beginning of Europe as the dominant global power in the world. it is China that invents gunpowder, right? About over 1,000 years ago. But it is Europe that will perfect gunpowder as the ultimate military weapon. And it will allow Europe to defeat everyone, including the Ottoman Turks, including the Chinese, everyone, okay? And the third and most important fundamental change is that gunpowder will usher in a whole society revolution that will remake the fabric and structure of European society. Okay? So I will explain all three as we move on. But these are the three fundamental impacts of gunpowder. All right, let's talk about the steppes. So before we discuss why the steppe people, the Vikings, the borderland people, they usually tend to win out against empires, even though empires have much more resources, much more people, much more technology, okay? So this is the chart that explains why the borderlands wins out in the end. Because the borderlands have energy. The people are much more courageous, they're much more hungry, they're much more determined. Openness. The borderlands people tend to be much more innovative. They're open to new ideas. They don't invent things, but they take inventions and they apply it to their society. The last is opportunistic, where they will only attack you if they think you're weak. Okay? The empire has three advantages: mass, organization, and depth. Mass just means a lot of people. Organization means a centralized bureaucracy. And then depth just means that they can afford to lose a lot of battles. Okay? And for most of human history, the borderlands had advantages over the empire. But with the advent of gunpowder, the dynamic changes. So now that the empire is able to control and crush the borderlands. The main reason why is with gunpowder technology, you need organization. You need centralization. Remember, before, armies were self-sufficient. You needed to go to war, you told everyone, let's go to war. And then the people who were soldiers would get their armor and they would rush to battle. Okay? That's what the Greeks did against the Persians. But with gunpowder, you need a professional army, you need engineers, you need the resources that allow you to make gunpowder. Okay? So you need specialization. With specialization, you need centralization, hierarchy, and bureaucracy. And that's what empires do very well. And the borderlands don't do this, okay? And that's why eventually the empires will win out against the borderlands in the long term. All right. So there are four major gunpowder empires, meaning these four societies are most equipped, most ready to take advantage of the gunpowder revolution. The first and most important gunpowder empire are the Ottomans, right? They're the ones who took the cannons, the artillery, and they're the ones who destroyed Constantinople. And the Ottomans, after that, became the dominant power in Europe and the Middle East, okay? The Ottoman Empire. What made the Ottoman Empire so fierce was the use of professional soldiers called janissaries. Janissaries are young boys who are Christian, and they became slaves to the Ottomans. And they were educated to become professional soldiers. And because they're basically slaves, they owe their entire loyalty to the Sultan, the king of the Ottoman Empire. Okay? And these are professional soldiers who made very effective use of gunpowder in battle. Okay? So that's the Ottoman Empire. But then you also have the Mughal Empire, which was the height of Indian civilization. They were also, for the longest time, a centralized bureaucracy, and they were also able to take advantage of gunpowder. Then you have the Safavid Empire, which is in modern-day Iran. They are the heirs to the Persian Empire. And remember, what you learned last semester is it was really the Persians who created bureaucracy in the world. Okay. And of course, the last and arguably the most powerful of these gunpowder empires is China. Okay, this is the Ming Empire. Remember, it was China who invented gunpowder. But what's interesting is when China invented gunpowder, it was not used that effectively. The Chinese army used gunpowder mainly as bombs or as fireworks, as incendiaries to blow things up, okay? But because of the Islamic Golden Age and because of Genghis Khan's conquest, globalization came into being. And the technology of paper and gunpowder spread all the way to Europe. It was the Europeans who innovated gunpowder and turned it into a propellant, okay? Something that you shoot people at, a projectile. And that's why we have cannons and muskets. And so it was the Europeans who actually invented gunpowder as a projectile. And then what would happen is this technology would come back to China, and China would adapt this into their own army. Okay, so that was the process. Yeah, so this is China and the use of gunpowder. Okay, so the paradox is this: it was China who invented the gunpowder, and the four great gunpowder empires are the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mongols, and the Chinese. But at the end of the day, it is Europe that conquers the entire world. Okay, that's the paradox. That's the mystery that we're looking at today. And so the thesis, the answer is European nations would surpass the gunpowder empires because they would adopt a whole society approach to warfare. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that if you are really to integrate gunpowder into your military effectively, you need to change the structure of your society. You have to change the status quo. You have to move from a society that is heavily centralized to one that is both centralized and open as well. Okay? So I'm going to explain to you what changes Europe had to make in order to move to become a modern military. Okay, the first change is it went from a feudal system to a nation-state system.